It's match day -1 with Arsenal looking ahead to a game against PSG, really to save their season. But they could be saving it in quite an incredible way. It will require an unbelievable comeback. For some might call it unbelievable. But we've seen this Arsenal team do some incredible things, both good and bad. So really, anything is possible. This is today's Arsenal News Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is our Arsenal News Show. This episode is a pre-recorded one because I'm currently, as you are listening to this, on the Eurostar on the way to Paris. And as usual with our pre-recorded episodes, I like to have a guest on to talk about all things Arsenal as they are right now. And I've got a special guest for you today because it is the creator of Arsblog and the host of the Arscast. It's Mr. Andrew. How you doing, mate? You good, you well?
I'm good, thanks, Tom. How are you?
Not bad. We are, I'll give reference to those that are listening. We're recording this on the Sunday morning ahead of the game and in the immediate aftermath of the Bournemouth defeat. So emotions are relatively still raw from that fixture. We're going to reference that game and obviously look ahead a lot to Wednesday night as well as this goes out Tuesday morning. So there's a lot of time traveling going on here, Andrew. But how are you feeling in the cold light of a Sunday morning after that defeat to Bournemouth?
I think I kind of have to widen it out a little bit as well. Not just Bournemouth. I think, the game against Crystal Palace recently is one that sort of I can't separate from this Bournemouth game. And I know they were both around Champions League games, et cetera, and sort of more wide than that is the recent form. It's only 3 wins from the last 10 in the Premier League, and all of a sudden we're looking over our shoulders at teams coming up behind us who really shouldn't be that close to us. We should be some distance ahead of them. I'm not saying we should be right up the backside of Liverpool or anything like that, but I think there should be, based on where we were and what we've done to get there should be more distance between Arsenal and Manchester City and Newcastle and the other teams who are scrapping away for that top 4. So I feel very much like Arsenal have opportunities, maybe the wrong word, but they've let themselves down in recent weeks, and the performances and the results have not been good enough, particularly when you think about the fact that we've been ahead in the games against Palace and the games against the game against Bournemouth, to let that slip, let those leads slip and to come away from yesterday with nothing. I think we have to look at ourselves, even if there are some factors within this game that, perhaps might be viewed as fine margins.
Yeah, absolutely. I came out of that game walking into the press room, and I think I saw Art DeRoche, and I just said to him, I won't repeat the words exactly that I used, but they weren't positive ones. But in some ways, I'd kind of succumbed to an expectation that these domestic performances in particular are just kind of connected a thread where, and I asked Arteta after the game whether he had noticed a difference between these league games where the gap to Liverpool was open to a point where clearly the title is unattainable. And so that motivation in those games somewhat diminishes, as opposed to the Champions League where you've got a tangible piece of silverware to chase. He said, in a very Arteta press room answer, they try not to let that happen. And it's more of an individual thing than a team thing. Where do you sit with kind of the league performances and the disassociation in some ways between those European games? But some may argue that PSG first leg and the performance and perhaps the start of that game came about in part, not just because PSG are excellent, but also because we haven't been necessarily on it too much of late.
Sure. I mean, I don't think you can completely omit the human nature element of this, right? That if every single Arsenal fan knows that the PSG game is far more important in terms of success than the Bournemouth game, then I'm pretty sure the players know that too, and they probably feel that too. But ultimately, it's their job. This is their job to go out and win games and perform and produce consistently. And I think maybe we could sit here this morning or pour over that Bournemouth defeat if Mikel Arteta had very clearly prioritized the PSG game on Wednesday in terms of his team selection. Now, I know options were pretty limited in terms of what he could do and what he could change. But that was essentially the strongest team he could pick. Bar Jurien Timber at right back, who is obviously out, and maybe we'll talk about him in a few minutes. But he brought Partey back in. Marino, Trossard is a kind of either or up front, but beyond that, everything is as strong as it can be. So the message that team sends to fans is, we're taking this game seriously. We want to win it. We want to take 3 points. We're aware we're playing a Champions League semi-final in 3-4 days' time, but we're going to ask our best players to go out and do what we know that they can do in this game against Bournemouth. And they didn't do it.
No.
So that sort of adds to the disappointment, I think. You know, if he picks a team with a load of youngsters and Raheem Sterling and Zinchenko and Tierney and, you know, guys who are very, very much on the periphery, and you lose to Bournemouth, I think people would say, well, that's not great. But, you know, we've made it clear that we are prioritizing and saving our bacon for Wednesday. That wasn't the case. And I think that kind of feeds into the way people have reacted to this game.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair. And I think that, I mean, Elliot talks about trap games, doesn't he, at times on the Vision, and how you can kind of look so far ahead that you forget what's in front of you. And it's hard, because I think that there are, it can't all be about the distraction of PSG, the distraction of Europe, because that in some ways foregoes responsibility that the players have for these games, because it's not all sorted. We're not, you know, Liverpool, PSG, where you can afford to kind of drop points and rotate because you've already wrapped up what you've needed to wrap up. There is still a very real possibility that Arsenal could, weirdly, it's very slim even after Arsenal's defeat, because of the fact that so many of the teams playing each other. And of course, as we speak about this, we don't know Sunday's results as of yet. But with so many of those other teams playing one another, there is still, you know, the chances of Arsenal dropping out the top 5 entirely are very small. But it's still not 100% secured. And it's hard to look at the form of this season and not talk about external factors, of course, that have affected Arsenal through injury, through some of the decisions that, of course, have gone against Arsenal. But for me, the outstanding stat, Andrew, is that 21 points that have been dropped from winning positions now. I'm trying to think if beyond the Aston Villa game, if there was another game where Arsenal had a 2-goal lead that slipped. I don't think there is from memory. So most of these games have been like a 1-goal lead, or obviously we've been leading and drawn, or leading and then lost. And in those games particularly, there have been kind of glaring opportunities as well that the team has not taken. And in some ways, yesterday was kind of a microcosm of that, because, you know, Rice had that chance early on that he kind of put wide. Martinelli dragged that shot opportunity wide as well. Saka has a chance in the second half. Trossard had that stooping header that Kepa got down to save. It wasn't like Arsenal struggled to create big opportunities in this game, even though maybe their free-flowing best wasn't on display as often as we would like. But for me, I think use the word, we didn't kill it in the presser afterwards. And that seems to have been the case for a lot of games this season. So is it really as simple as that? Is it as simple as Arsenal's season would just look insanely different if we were 50% more clinical in the box?
100%. I mean, that stat about dropping points from winning positions is an interesting one. For me, something I wrote about in my blog this morning. It'll be on Sunday's blog if people want to go back and look at it, given that you're listening to this on a Tuesday. Here's a stat for you. In 17 of our 35 Premier League games, Arsenal have scored 1 or no goals in those games. So basically half the games we've either scored 1 goal or no goals. In 4 of those games, we won 1-0. 1-0 to the Arsenal is fine. We all like a bit of that. We lost 4 of them, going down 2-0, 1-0, 1-0, and yesterday's 2-1, and the others have been draws, a series of 1-1 draws. So when you tally up the amount of points that's dropped, that's 30 points, because we have not been able to score more than 1 goal in a game in 50% of our Premier League games this season. And I think at this point, and I've been with you, and I've written about this, I've spoken about this. I think some of the external factors are obviously impactful on our season and how it went. Right, injuries. You know, we've been without a recognized center forward for months now since Kai Havertz has been out and had that injury with Saka, with Jesus, with Odegaard, all these things, those decisions. Some of those decisions were crazy, absolutely. But we had 7 of those games where we didn't score more than 1 goal before the Bukayo Saka injury against Crystal Palace. They've been more frequent since, for obvious reasons. But I think we have to start looking at how this squad has been built and what is available to the manager. And I'm not excusing him from this, because I think he has a direct hand in our recruitment and the recruitment decisions that we make. But ultimately, for me, this is a season where we have made the margins razor thin, because you can get terrible decisions that go against you. But if you score a couple of goals in a game, you're better able to deal with those. We haven't made the most of 2 transfer windows. January, do we need to relitigate that? No, probably not. There were probably things that Arsenal could have done in January, but chose not to do. And I think we've paid the price for that. We've suffered for that, right? Similarly, last summer, we did not add to the squad properly when it comes to the attack. Having started the summer looking at Benjamin Sesko, we ended up bringing in Raheem Sterling on loan on deadline day. And that is, I don't want to kill Raheem Sterling, but as a signing, it has been little short of a disaster. And a game like yesterday, it's 1-1, and you're thinking, we've got to do something a bit different here. What have we got on our bench? We have Marino, we have Nwaneri, and, both players who've contributed goals. I don't think we gave them enough time yesterday. Maybe there's physical issues about them. We don't know. I don't really understand Nwaneri coming on with 5 minutes to go as part of like a triple sub Hail Mary with Zinchenko and Sterling. But ultimately, we don't have enough on the bench. We don't have enough firepower within the squad. We're not clinical enough with the chances that we make. And therefore, in a game like yesterday, where it's 1-1 and it could go either way, we cannot deal with the arbitrariness of how football operates sometimes, that they get the goal from a corner that we probably shouldn't have conceded, by the way. I think we could have got rid of that ball and pumped it up the field a little bit. We were jittery at the back. We were taking chances. I know Arteta likes us to keep the ball. He doesn't want them to hoof it, but sometimes you've got to play with a bit of common sense. They get the break. We can maybe talk about the goal, whether it should be a goal or not, but we are the wrong side of the fine margins because we do not score enough goals.
Yeah. And there's naturally, and I said this when I was on with you on your show, but obviously living in this YouTube-y world, you kind of get a raw reaction from a lot of that, the chat box that we have live. And there was a lot of anger on Sunday morning as I was doing the 8 a.m. show, and a lot of particularly kind of, as you referenced, towards the transfer windows and the lack of recruitment in those specific areas. And we're in a weird scenario here as Arsenal fans in that sense, because the main guy, the head guy of recruitment, and I agree with you, Arteta's involved, but he's not the guy that gets the deals done. He's up to those behind him. And the guy that was in charge of that is gone. So, and Arsenal now have somebody new in that position in Andrea Berta. So how are you feeling about him moving forwards into this summer? And are you confident that that was the right decision to bring in somebody very un-Arsenal, if you like?
Well, we had to bring in somebody. I mean, yeah, you're right about like Arteta is not the guy to get the deals done, but I think he's a very strong driving force in who those deals are, who those players are, that he wants those deals done. Look, I don't think the departure of Edu was in any way helpful for January. We had a sort of, not a vacuum of responsibility, but we didn't have that person there of Edu's stature and experience and reputation within the club where he says, I don't know, let's say you go for Asensio in January, like Villa did, right? A useful player for them, not a player for the long term. You pay a little bit over the odds, but we need something because we've lost Saka and we've lost Havertz and we've lost Jesus and we're light anyway. We need something. We've got to get it done. I don't think that person was there to really, really drive that. So I don't think it was helpful. It's never helpful when you lose a big executive in mid-season. Whether that was a thing that was coming and had an impact on last summer's window, we can only speculate.
Yeah.
What I would hope, of course, is that with Andrea Berta, that the experience is there, and there's like an acknowledgement, perhaps, on the part of the club that the last two windows have been subpar, because I think a big part of why Arsenal have been so good and have developed so well is because we had good transfer windows, right? And then all of a sudden you have two really poor ones and you're taking a step backwards. You're regressing. Do the math, as they say, So I think it is really, really important this summer that the right decisions are made, that there is a proper strategy put in place for who we buy and who we bring in, and the needs of the squad are addressed properly. There's more to do than bringing in a striker and another forward, but those have got to be the priorities. That the bit where Arsenal are weakest is putting the ball in the back of the net. And I know we've had some issues with defending, some set pieces, a bit of vulnerability here, but we still, I think, have the best defensive record in the Premier League. So, that's something that can be improved. I'm not saying we should ignore it, but let's focus on what we really, really need. And what this team, for me, really needs is firepower and creativity. And those are the elements that I'm looking for this summer, because without them, I don't think we take a sufficient step forward to be challenging the way we want.
It's hard when you watch like at PSG, for example, where they just pepper the opponent. Like, yes, they miss, and we talked about that last week. They miss a lot of chances as well, but it's almost a case of like it's waiting for the floodgates to open, because it's just such high levels of pressure. And yes, they're a more dominant force in their own domestic league, but they're doing it in Europe as well against some very, very impressive teams as well. And that added firepower, it's been such a glaring need, for so long, that there really, really is there's no excuse this summer when it comes to that. And if Arsenal, and particularly Andrea Berta, and I was mentioning it on Sunday morning, is that he is not an appointment like Arteta was or like Edu was, where these individuals are clearly talented at what they do, but also to an extent are learning while they are in post. Andrea Berta is an experience. Yes, he's learning a new environment, of course, but he is an experienced figurehead. He is somebody that has done this and been around the block a hell of a lot at a top European club and has completed big deals and, formulated a strategy to get Atletico Madrid competing in the market with some of the biggest teams in Europe and punching above their weight in their domestic league and arguably across European competition to an extent as well. So there is no free hit for me, this summer with our business, because we have a brand new person in charge. It has to be. This summer is incredibly important to get correct and to get right. And that's why I think they've appointed him and not, say, a Thomas Rosicky or kept Jason Ato in charge. They've brought in somebody like Andrea Berta to be somebody who does give immediacy.
I guess so. But it's about, like, what is that dynamic like between Berta and Arteta? Is he going to challenge him? Is he going to push back maybe at some of the ideas that Mikel Arteta has about transfers? Is he going to be more aligned with the board, the ownership, which I suppose would be the ideal scenario, right? If you want the manager and the sporting director to work well together, no question. It doesn't have to be a relationship in which there is constant conflict, because that's not healthy.
Yeah.
I suppose ultimately what you're looking at is somebody who can facilitate what the manager wants to the best extent possible, but also operate in a way that is more or most beneficial to the club too.
Yeah.
So if Mikel Arteta says, look, I want to spend £100 million on this guy, that's it. That's the guy I want. I won't discuss this. I want this. This is what, which maybe is what we got with Declan Rice. Okay. That worked out well, by the way. I'm not criticizing that. But maybe Andrea Berta has to say, well, look, we can't spend £100 million on this, but we can spend £100 million on this, this, and this. And for the benefit of the club and squad depth. And that's where I'm really curious to see how this summer plays out. I think Berta's experience in European football at a club like Atletico Madrid, where you have this powerful, charismatic, very demanding manager, augurs well for what he is being brought into Arsenal to do. But I also think there needs to be, if not separation, we need to see that he's got his own ideas.
Yeah.
You need to see that his experience plays out in the transfer business that Arsenal do, and he's not simply there to facilitate whatever it is that Mikel Arteta wants. And I'm not saying all of Arteta's decisions are bad, far
Yeah.
from it. He pushed for players like Ben White, he pushed for players like David Raya. They've worked out very well. Declan Rice is another one that I mentioned as well. Very,
Gabriel,
very, very heavily driven by, very heavily driven by Mikel Arteta. So some of those decisions are very good. But then you might also ask, it's not to be critical of these players, a couple of players last summer who we brought in, Mikel Merino and Ricardo Calafiori, jury's still kind of out on them in their natural positions.
Sure.
Look, next season they could be brilliant for us, and that those transfers are justified and everything else. But I would like to see a challenging environment in which ideas are thrown around and it doesn't always go one way.
Yeah, I'd throw Julian Timber as well into that. If you didn't mention him already, I think they've been there, and there are other signings, like Fabio Vieira, as well. That's a lot of money that was spent on Fabio Vieira that wasn't worked out. I was a little surprised as well when I asked, because I said, you signed Fabio Vieira 2 years ago. Is that an area attacking midfield you want some depth? We'll talk probably a little bit about Odegaard as well if we have time. And it was interesting to say that he talked a lot about Max Down, and then that became something of a thread of that press conference, especially in the embargoed section later on. But just on Berta quickly, while you were talking, it was interesting to hear about kind of that conflict or lack of conflict. We hope there's not conflict, but certainly challenge and twisting things. Because when he was appointed, that particular press conference, I feel like I'm going press conference mad today with quotes and stuff. But when he was there and we met him for the first time, one of the questions that was lingering in my mind was, a lot of Arsenal's transfer business tends to be done well ahead of time, or at least that's what they say, that a lot of planning goes on months ahead of windows opening. And I was curious as to kind of whether or not Berta's arrival would dramatically change much of what they would do this summer. And when I put that to Arteta, I'll read you the quote that he said. He said, "That's why I mentioned that the good thing is the strong team that we have already in place, and all the work that the recruitment that Jason, James and all the boys have been doing, and everything is prepared. And then that planning has to be tweaked, because what you plan and you execute most of the time ends up being a bit different from the direction of the vision. And what we want to do is clear. Andrea would jump on board of that, and hopefully he will twist it and make it better. And that's why he's here." So that gives me a little encouragement, that they are somewhat malleable to what Berta is going to bring to that existing idea for this. I think, a deal like the Zubimendi situation, for instance, is one that he just basically has to get over the line. Whereas maybe the centre forward area, as we are hearing about the Victor Gyökeres kind of stuff more recently, whose name faded a bit in recent months and has now come back with Andrea Berta's arrival. Those maybe are the type of things that will see him have more of an influence on it in arguably the most important position. I'm conscious of the time, and I want to get onto PSG
Can I
as
just
well.
come back
Yeah,
to
go on.
one thing? Sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
When you mentioned the Max Dowman thing there, I thought it was very interesting. The cynic in me thinks you bring up Max Dowman unprompted when you're asked a question about creative midfielders, and everybody goes, "Ooh,
yeah,
another gem from the academy, another Lewis Skelly, another Nwaneri, another Saka, another Smith Rowe," and the focus is on Max Dowman rather than actually, however talented Max Dowman is, he doesn't turn 16 until December 31st. Realistically, how much is that kid going to play in the Premier League at 15 years of age? I think we can see from Premier League history, 15-year-olds do not play very much at all. So that question about what Arsenal have in the attacking midfield areas is a really, really valid one. And the Dowman stuff, as much as I'm invested in seeing this guy break through and do what he does at youth level, at senior level, and that's still up in the air because a lot of young players, find it hard to make that step up. I'd be delighted if he could do it, but not yet. It feels like a distraction.
Yeah.
And I think maybe I'm not putting anything on you or your colleagues in the press, but that's a question I would like to see raised again with Mikel Arteta, because, ultimately he talked about Declan Rice playing as a creative midfielder. I mean, look, he scores, he gets assists. He scored on Saturday against Bournemouth. Mikel Merino in the Martin Odegaard position, not for me. Yeah. And after that, he did mention Ethan Nwaneri, but he's never played Ethan Nwaneri in that position, so we don't know yet. Then all you've got is Martin Odegaard. And maybe it's a discussion, maybe it's not, maybe it's a topic people are bored of. But, when your only creative outlet, your only player with craft and vision and that final pass isn't at the top of his game and you have to keep on playing him, do you stick the knife into the player or do you ask a question as to why it is that we only have one player who can play in that position?
Because our rivals in recent years have had multiple. When De Bruyne has not been there, they've had Silva or Foden, doing that role. When Liverpool don't necessarily play with kind of an Odegaard style player, but they have depth in that midfield, with McAllister, Szoboszlai, but Elliott can also come in. They've got creativity from players like Trent, who move into the midfield and provide that.
Mm-hmm.
PSG have got, when we, looking ahead, like all of their midfielders, Vitinha, João Neves, Fabian Ruiz, can all produce some really creative, direct passes. And while Rice and Partey certainly can do that to an extent as well, they're not in the same ilk as an Erdogan.
Yeah. And what I was going to sort of just slightly expand on there is I think that when we talk about what's happened to Arsenal this season, we can talk about injuries and we can talk about lack of firepower and we can talk about decisions that have gone against us and we can talk about this, that, and the other. But I think there is another discussion to be had about the structure of the team and the organization of the team. Is it just those things? No, it's always a confluence of factors. But I think you maybe have to start looking at the way Arsenal are set up. Are there tactical questions? Are we a little bit rigid in our build-up? Is there room for greater expression in the kind of football that we play that would enable us to do things a little bit differently, a bit more variety? Therefore, it becomes a little less we become a little less predictable, right? Those are questions that I think are valid as well. When we talk about that creative midfielder situation, it's not just a case of like, oh, we want a nice guy who can dribble and burst between the lines and shoot one, bang one in from 30 yards. We all want that.
Yeah.
But there are, I think, legitimate questions about how Arsenal play. When we're good, we're really, really good. But I think increasingly it is teams are finding it not easier, but I think it is perhaps a little easier to snuff out where we are strong, particularly when certain elements of the team are not as strong as they need to be when we talk about strikers and wingers and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we've been awfully one-dimensional this season. And teams have exploited that fact. And, you look at yesterday, Saturday, against Bournemouth, the only major changes we made off the bench, came very late with that triple change, other than Mikel Merino, who just was basically a like-for-like swap at the time with Declan Rice. I had a feeling that maybe like Trossard might drop in and Merino might go up top, but it was just a like-for-like with Rice. And, last season when we didn't have these injury issues, there was more difference about how Arsenal attacked, and with the availability of players and the form of players, there was somewhat more, and that's why we were able to go on that brilliant run in the second half of the season and just smash teams out of the park so often. And I think that this summer again, we go back to those transfers again. We look ahead to next season. Next season's so big in terms of not just the summer, but obviously, as you point out there, how tactically we evolve, how this team works again against 19 other sides that know this Arsenal team, know this blueprint, know how to deal with it, and going again and trying something new. And I think that comes with new players because they offer new ideas and different nuances as well. And they'll have to adapt to whatever system Arteta wants. I'm just finding it very hard to analyse Arsenal at the moment, as effectively as I'd like to, with so many external things going on, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean, that is, you mentioned the word development, and that's what I think we need to see. Listen, I love Miles Lewis-Skelly. I think what he's done is exceptional this season. But are we at a point where Arsenal bringing their left back into midfield, leaving space sometimes down the right-hand side, which is where Bournemouth's first goal came from yesterday, by the way. We overcommitted in the opposition half. They'd all the freedom. Saliba put it out for a throw, long throw. We concede, Is that an area where we could get more out of Miles Lewis-Skelly by playing him in a more traditionally central role and doing something a little bit different at left back? Can we expand the pitch? Can we make the pitch bigger rather than squeezing our left back in? keeping our left back wide. I don't know. I'm just, spitballing ideas here, but I think there does need to be this summer when Arteta and his coaching staff sit down, they think about the season that they've had, they think about what they want to do in terms of players they want to add. It's all got to be tied to what do they want to do on the pitch next season. It's not just about, right, well, let's bring Gyökeres in because he's a big guy who can shoot very hard. What does that give us? Where can we get the ball to him? What areas of the pitch can we operate in that makes him more effective? Those things. And listen, this is like teaching a chicken how to lay eggs, I guess. This is stuff that they'll be well aware of. But I do think there is an important job this summer, because I don't think we can go out next season, even with improved players, and play exactly the same way and win games the way we need to win games if we want to challenge for the title.
Yeah, no, I think that's completely fair. Completely fair. And we'll talk all about that, I think, when we see how the summer does, develop and what players are signed or what players aren't signed by the end of that window. We've got about just over 10 minutes left this morning, and PSG is obviously the next game. How are you feeling about La Remontada for this fixture?
Oh God, you had to use that word, didn't you? How am I feeling about it? There's two schools of thought, I guess. One is that we're not focused on what we're doing in the Premier League, right? Because we're aware that the Champions League is the thing. And I talked about human nature at the start, and I do think that might be an issue. At the same time, though, you might also say that recent Premier League form does not augur particularly well for Wednesday night. We haven't been good. We weren't good against Bournemouth. We were sloppy. We were jittery. Is that because we were unfocused, or our minds were elsewhere, or are we nervous? Are we nervous about going to play PSG? And that's being that's manifesting itself in the performances that we're seeing in the Premier League. I think there might be something to that. So I don't think we are going into this game in good form, full of confidence, full of belief, full of, that those sort of intangible things that you get when you're playing well, where you don't worry. You go in, you say, listen, we know the opposition are good. We know they've got good players. We recognize their quality, but look at what we can do. Look at how well we're playing, and look at how solid the connections are all over the pitch. It is a bit worrying. At the same time, though, I think they'll be fully focused, hugely motivated. They'll know they've not been playing well. They know they've let themselves down in the Premier League, and that this is an opportunity to do something a little bit special. So it could go either way. I really can't sit here and tell you, yeah, it's going to be great, we're going to do this. We could just as easily not do that. But I'm hopeful that somehow we find a way through against a PSG side who demonstrated their quality last week, but at the end of the day, only won the game 1-0. We did have some chances to score. We did have some chances to hurt them. We've got to be more clinical, obviously. We've got to be tighter at the back, but it's 1-0, and anything can happen in a 1-0 game. PSG could get a man sent off in the opening 5 minutes, and then it becomes an easier, you just don't know. But I would feel probably a little bit better about things if we didn't lose in the way we lost against Bournemouth, where we went ahead, we threw it away. And that does have an impact on players and their confidence and everything else, so you just don't know. Europe is strange. Football is strange. I mean, what's your feeling on where we are and what we do and how you elicit a lot better from players than we saw on Saturday, for example?
Well, I think the first step is mental. I think it's about the attitude in this game as opposed to the Bournemouth game, because they don't need any extra motivation for this game. From a application of effort, if you like. We have, in my opinion, yes, we want to reach a final, but we have nothing to lose at a point where you're trailing going into a second leg. The emphasis is on you to attack, to go for it. Obviously, you don't want to leave yourself too exposed because the gap is only a single goal. and that it's not like, Real Madrid when they played their second leg, for example. There is a difference between being 1-0 down and 3-0 down going into a second leg. But I think that there is, because of course PSG have this aura of desperation to win the Champions League as well, like we do. It's not like going to another side at this stage of a competition. Not like going to a Barcelona or a Bayern Munich. I think there is a difference between those teams and going to a PSG at this stage. And I think there's a lot of mental games that are going to go on in this fixture that will play on those players' minds. The worrying factor that PSG have in their arsenal is Luis Enrique, who obviously has been here before, and his experience has been vital in that club's revitalization, if you like, since losing a player like Kylian Mbappe, for instance. They look more like a team, and I think he is a perfect kind of calming head, if you will, to see you through a Champions League semi-final when you've won the first leg away from home. I think obviously the benefit of having Thomas Partey back for this game is obviously a very important factor. We missed him in the first leg for sure, and I'm glad that he did start at the weekend, because he tends to be a little rusty when he misses a game and comes back in. And I thought, he misplaced a few passes at the start of the game against Bournemouth, and I think that rustiness was there. So I'm glad that he got that fixture to be up to speed, if you like. I think hopefully Mikel Merino is going to be fit enough to start the game at centre forward, because while, yes, we're quite a one-dimensional side, that one dimension can still be pretty threatening. And I think to be at our best with the available players, Mikel Merino is going to be a huge part of that at centre forward. So Saka and Martinelli have more of a target to run off of and play off of, and we can, really cause them some issues there. But I was talking, I think it was, I'm trying to think who it was. It might have been Jordan from The Sun, who was talking about Jordan Davies, saying he just can't see PSG not scoring. He can't see them. He can't see us keeping a clean sheet in Paris. I don't know how you feel about that. I think we've had some defensive issues this team, but as you rightly pointed out, we still have the best defensive record in the Premier League. Kiwior's been good since coming in. Saliba was excellent yesterday, I thought. Some of his interceptions and tackles yesterday were really good. And hopefully Durian Timber comes back as well. We don't know about Dembele. We don't know if he's going to be there. But even if he's not, Kvaratskhelia, Barcola and Doué are still an excellent front three to have. But yeah, how do you feel based on some of those thoughts there?
I wouldn't put a lot of money on us keeping a clean sheet against PSG away, but I don't think it's something we're incapable of either. I think a bit depends on Timber. I'm not sure if Mikel Arteta is playing mind games when he talks about Timber. He was asked on Sky Sports last night, is there a chance he misses the game? And he said, yeah, there's a chance, a big chance. I mean, do you play mind games over a right back? I'm not sure.
He does. He does that all the time.
He does do it all the time. So, listen, I love Ben White, but I don't think he's found his best form since the surgery and coming back from the surgery. He's been in and out. He's had a little niggle here, a little niggle there, and he hasn't been able to sort of recapture match fitness and form or anything like that. And I think that was evident yesterday in aspects of his game against Bournemouth, where I thought, for example, very, very good in the air, dominant in the air, but when the ball was on the ground, he got exposed a couple of times. And I just think that's to do with match fitness and form. So Timber being there would be very useful. I do think it is probably going to be the basis of the game plan, though. It feels a bit like going to Anfield in 1989. Keep it 0-0 at halftime, and all of a sudden they're like 0-0. If we nick a goal, listen, we potentially only need to score one goal to go through.
True,
because we could win a penalty shootout.
Yeah, because that happens.
That always happens. Listen, we've won some, we've lost some, but it's it's there.
If you offered me a penalty shootout now,
well, yeah, probably you take it.
You probably would, right? Yeah, you probably would flip the coin.
The bigger question for me is like, how many of our best players are going to be on the pitch after 120 minutes? Our best penalty takers, rather, I should say, are going to be on the pitch after 120 minutes. Which is why yesterday I was a little surprised to see Bukayo Saka stay on as long as he did. He might be needed for 120 minutes because he's one of our best penalty takers. So, I think it will be based on not doing anything silly, not giving anything away, Making sure as well, by the way, that when this game starts, we do not spend the first half an hour chasing our tail, chasing PSG around the pitch as they have 70% possession. We've got to make sure that we start the game with with more intent,
authority.
A bit more authority, a bit more confidence. We don't have to expose ourselves. We don't have to go gung-ho from the start, but win some tackles, win the ball, keep the ball for a little while. That'll be a loud crowd. They'll whistle and they'll jeer, but just keep the ball for a little bit. So we have to manage this game really, really well. It's a Champions League semi-final. It's a huge opportunity for the club and for the players and for the manager. 20 years basically since we've been in a Champions League final. That's too long. So I hope that they can rise to the occasion. I think what we have to do is be mindful of getting this tag as nearly men, which I think we sort of have.
Yeah.
And if we go out in the semi-final of a Champions League, having gone out in the semi-finals of the EFL Cup this year, having missed out on the title 2 years in a row, there will be this baggage that's there as nearly men, guys, a team that's good but just can't quite get it over the line. And that can be hard to shake. That can become a bit of a burden, So I'm hopeful we can rise to the occasion. We've got to play better than we did and have done in the Premier League of late. Channel all the good stuff that we did against Real Madrid, bring that into this game. Let that belief and let that flow through the team, and then I think we've got a chance. This stage of the competition, you're up against real quality, and ultimately that one goal by Dembele could decide this entire tie. Who knows? But I hope that we can really lift ourselves and give everybody something to celebrate, because the last few weeks, at least domestically, have been pretty rough going. Liverpool to come, Newcastle to come. There's work still to be done in the Premier League, but if we get to the Champions League final, if we win the Champions League final, not a single person will care about what happened in the Premier League this season. And that is a way for Arsenal, the players, the manager, to sort of wipe the slate clean and go into next season on the back of something very special. So I'm keeping fingers crossed.
If I was to push you for a prediction, what would you say?
I would say I don't know. It's Sunday morning. It's too far out. I don't know who's playing.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
I can't do it at this point because, it'll probably be very different a day before the game. It'll probably be very different an hour before the game.
Yeah.
My prediction is, in very vague terms, I think Arsenal will do themselves some justice in Paris. Whether it's enough to win the game or not, we'll have to see. But I don't think we will be as meek as we were against Bournemouth. That's I'm keeping everything crossed for that these aren't famous last words,
Yeah, a prediction of improvement, I think.
Yeah. Why not?
Yeah. It better bloody be. I was so at the club walked past yesterday, and then they turned around to me and they were like, "It's fine. We'll make it good on Wednesday." And I was like, "We better."
Yeah, please do, if you wouldn't mind.
Yeah, I was like, "We better." Yeah. Oh, fingers crossed. Andrew, it's been an absolute pleasure always. I appreciate you jumping on a Sunday morning to chat, and make sure you give yourself and the platform a shout out and where they can find you and what you're going to be up to.
Yeah, just all the usual stuff at arsblog.com. Everything operates off that, so we'll see you there. And safe travels and successful travels. Hope you're coming back Thursday morning full of smiles and good cheer, and probably a little hangover.
Indeed, yeah, almost certainly. If we do manage to go through, I've had some excellent trips so far. My debut season traveling as well. We've won in Girona, we've won in Eindhoven, we've won in Madrid. So let's keep that form going. As Andrew pointed out, listeners, you can go and check out the Arscast and the Arscast Extra, which I imagine will be, of course, already out by the point you see this in the wake of the game against Bournemouth. So go listen back to that if you want to hear some more analysis of that, of course, as well. And of course, you can read all of the articles on the Arse blog website, of course, as well as the most recent blog too. I imagine I've one ahead of the PSG game as well, Andrew.
For sure.
So make sure you go and give that a read. And if you enjoy the content so much, you can, of course, join up to the Patreon as well to get lots of additional content over at Arseblog and the Arsecast. Thank you, all of our listeners, for tuning in. Really appreciate it. I hope you've appreciated this extra piece of content while, of course, I'm traveling to the French capital. I'll be back with you the usual time on Wednesday morning, the morning of the game, from a hotel in Paris, hoping that we can get the job done in the way that we all dream that we can. Have a fantastic rest of your day, whatever you happen to be doing. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful. And as always, up the Arsenal.